Right.
Wait a minute.
All right. We are live. No countdown. We're hopping right in. It is another month, another year, and another episode. In fact, it is our 23rd episode. And when I say our, hi, everyone. Welcome back. It is me, Eric Saunders, the Green Eye Bandit, and I am joined by the one and only. Oh, wait a minute, this way.
Hi, it's Tamika. How are you?
Who, me? Or are you talking to the audience out there?
I'm
Okay.
talking to both. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to all. I'm talking to everybody. Is that okay? Can I
That is
just, it's an
perfectly.
open-ended question. How is
Yeah.
everybody? How are you doing today, tonight?
And if you- tonight. And if you're viewing out there, again, welcome to another episode. Thank you guys who have been viewing and been coming back and adding to the conversation. You are very much so a part of this panel. And we have a dope panel tonight. But before we do, Tamika, can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight?
Oh my goodness! You put the
Yes.
pressure right on me today. It's crazy. I love having these conversations. But Gen Z and millennials converse about politics and race. And I can't wait to ask the first question till we get into that. But I know before we get in there, we really need to figure out who else is on the panel. I mean, you introduce yourself. I kind of introduced myself a little bit, maybe not so much, but hi, I'm Tamika Catchings. I'm Eric Saunders' co-host, and I'm just so excited to be here today. But let's meet them. It's not about me.
Right. So let's jump right in. Anybody would like to go first, or do you like to be voluntold? All right. Lauren, we'll start with you. You smile first, and you smile the hardest.
I was just gonna volunteer anyway, just take the pressure off. But name is Lauren Beasley. Born in Atlanta, raised in Detroit. Been residing in Indianapolis now for almost 6 years now. But in the content creator space, currently work with the WNBA's Indiana Fever as the digital content manager there and marketing manager for the team. And in the last few years, I also became an author for the first time, writing my own book called The Hidden Perspective of a Virgin. So just happy to be here and can't wait to get started with this on this conversation.
Congratulations. Thank you.
And she goes by LB.
Yeah.
So Lauren, do you want Lauren or do you want LB? What do you want? I know your professional name.
I honestly will respond to both. Normally, Lauren only confuses me when there's other Laurens in the room. So I think we're okay. So if you call me Lauren, I'll respond immediately. But if you say LB, I'll know.
You know what? It's Friday night. We having a good time. You've been called Lauren all week. LB it is. All right. All right, Franklin, go ahead, man. I just said your name, but go ahead.
Clint, I'm originally from Anderson, Indiana. I went to school at Purdue Northwest on a basketball scholarship. Wasn't nearly as good as Miss Tamika, of course. But played basketball there, graduated with a broadcasting major in communications. And after I ended up getting my degree, ended up moving back home, found a job, not necessarily in my field, but right now I'm working in transportation basically for DHL, and basically using that to fund my creative kind of identity with a podcast that I have called Hate to Hear It Podcast. Basically, mostly we talk about culture and not really politics and stuff. We do talk about it somewhat, but it's mostly based on culture and music and things of, kind of the new age and hip hop and things of that. And also I have a small business and a clothing line where I make custom sweaters and custom pants from blankets and sell them, and different kind of creative things like that. But yeah, I'm excited for this conversation and excited to see where it goes.
All right, man. I like to know more about those clothes. I caught that from blankets. So yeah, that's the attention. Because automatically I went to my old grandmother's quilts and I was like, man, I know these sweatpants sure are heavy. So, all right. Okay, Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm from Anderson, Indiana. And I'm a freshman at Ball State, majoring in hospitality and food management.
All right, thank you so much, Kelsey. Appreciate it. Hey, Daniel, how you doing? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
How you doing, sir? Welcome, team. My name is Daniel Hiles. My wife Callie and I own a couple of businesses in Anderson, Indiana. The Usual Suspects Cigar Bar, as well as Kettle Top Brew House, and we are partners in a brewery called the Creatures of Habit Brewing Co. Just a little bit about me. Born and raised in Jonesboro, Indiana, huge city up north. I'm totally kidding. It's very, very small, but born and raised there. Moved to Anderson as I started a career at Nestle USA. And I was there for about 10 years and decided that I wanted to change, go into business for myself. And my amazing wife followed my crazy dreams, and that's how it works. So business owner in Anderson, Indiana.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a visual artist, not just any visual artist. She has been doing her thing over the recent years, and I've crossed paths with her. We started off like a community events, right? And then when you look up, the art scene is booming here in the city, and Kayla's name is definitely in that circle, in that connection. Recently saw her at the Butter art exhibit and did very well there. And she's just all around talented individual. Just thank you so much for coming. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing and what you're going to be working on tonight?
Of course, yeah. So hi again, I'm Kayla. I'm born and raised here in Indianapolis. I went to IU. I got a triple major in painting, Black studies, and art history. And then came back home and I worked in museums for about a decade, and then now I have a historic consulting organization. And the visual arts are a part of it, right? So what I do is I go into African-American communities around Indianapolis, help them figure out what their history is, right? And help them use that as that history to protect themselves, right? And the visual arts are a great component of this. Like, I can make your grandfather's face 50 feet tall, and put a mural up so that they know who you guys are. And little things like that are actually have really big impacts in our communities, and how we see ourselves in these spaces. So right now I'm working with a small community on the southeast side named Norwood. Norwood this year is a small Black neighborhood near Fountain Square. It's celebrating its 150th birthday this year. And I've been recording oral histories with the elders in their community. This woman I'm painting here is Miss Oneida. She's the aunt of one of the elders there. And so all the photos that I get are in black and white. And so I'm trying to colorize them, right? Trying to make them more real than the black and white image does. So that's what I'll be doing with you guys here today. No promises it's going to go smoothly or that it will be finished, but should be a good watch at least.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm excited. Are you guys excited to see how that goes? Because first of all, I think we all just kind of, we tip our hat to you for just taking on these projects that you're doing, because I've not heard, first of all, I've not heard of Norwood. That's the name of it, correct?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how little's known about it for how long it's been there. There's nothing in the archives for the the state museum. There's nothing in the libraries. The Historical Society has a little bit of information, but nothing about it being founded by the U.S. colored troops, and nothing about the really long legacy that it's held in Indianapolis. It was its own independent city for 50 years before it was annexed in to the city. So it's going to be really cool for the next year to keep pulling everything out, seeing what happens.
Yeah, we might need to make a trip over there.
Absolutely.
We act like it's so far away, but
Yeah, well,
no, it's not that far.
In May, we'll be starting. I'm working with Samson Levingston. He does the walking history tours for Ransom Place, Indiana Avenue, and we're making a Black history tour for Fountain Square.
Absolutely.
All right. In May, no specific date. Just
it should start the first weekend in May. I'm not sure. He'll be announcing it soon.
Okay.
And I think that's a great place to really start to get this conversation going, because again, we don't know about the places like Norwood. I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, and one of the first things you hear about is Crispus Attucks High School, Indiana Avenue, and certain parts just being a part of the city. But when you get to think about it, how many cities do we have across America, big cities, large cities, where the history is already well known, especially up in the north, where you had a lot of African Americans at the time migrating to the north and creating new histories and creating new futures. But now things have just really become blended. And here we are having these conversations about politics and race, and we're looking at things in the current. And to a lot of people are maybe upset and frustrated about these topics. These are very heated topics in our country, always have been. But it seems like as we begin to have these conversations, it becomes personal. Am I right? And it begins to point the finger at this person, you're this, that, and another, and get into the stereotypes and the microaggressions and so on and so on. But we fail to look deeper into history and uncover those rocks, and not to just point fingers, but finally try to get to a place of peace, because we can't change the past, but we can do a better job of changing the future. So I'm looking very much so forward to this conversation tonight. That's my energy that I'm bringing to. Bring your whole energy tonight, because we've been doing that. We got folks on Facebook that will be chiming in. They've been bringing the energy. And so as you're looking on Facebook, I have my phone right here. And so please, again, be a part of the conversation tonight. Tamika, you said you wanted to kick it off. You had a question. You ready to kick it off?
Of course, I'm ready to kick it off. And I think just kind of segueing away, one of the things that I think about is, and we're here to talk about politics. We're here to talk about race professionally, I guess, in a good way, right? And I think the question that I wrote down is, when you think about where you are today, how has the conversation around race and politics, how has it been in your family? I know personally, like for me, until I got, within age, I guess, to be able to vote, and even then, I don't really remember kind of talking about politics. And even when I think about race, I mean, our growing up, our background really was, we grew up in predominantly white areas, and I remember probably the conversation that we had coming home, specifically when I was in high school, coming home and my sister asking, like, how many Black kids are in your class, and saying like, how many Black kids are you going to graduate with? And that's really like the conversation that we had around race in general, nothing beyond that, until I've gotten older, and now being able to really have conversations, being able to use my voice, use my platform. But for each one of you guys, as we start the conversation today, let's set the table here. Where have the conversations been in your family, really specifically around race and politics? Anybody?
I'm happy to start. I would say for me growing up, it's just been me and my mom. So these conversations actually for us were quite fluid. My mom's always been pretty transparent and just more so wanted to have an open form of communication about anything, whether it be, being a young Black woman in America, and the things you're going to experience and the things that you might go through, but then just also translating outside of race. And then she's always been the type of person who wanted me to also understand how things work. So like you referenced government, it went beyond just knowing who the president was and the mayor and the governor. It's understanding how government works and educating yourself, or helping to educate ourselves outside of what I'm learning in the classroom. But I'll say what has changed more so is everyday conversation now includes these things. That wasn't something that I grew up experiencing. Now, mind you, when you're in high school and you're 18 or you're 16, I don't think you're naturally having conversations about the president anyway. But even when I think back to my early 20s in college, where I went to a predominantly white college, we weren't having conversations about race, even though it was very clear it was only about 5% African American at that school. We didn't talk about it amongst ourselves. We didn't talk about it with other students who were of another race. So now pretty much anywhere I go, whether I'm in a work situation, whether I'm even with my own extended family outside of my mother, I just seem to find more conversations stemming around race. It can just be what's going on in the world, and it's a conversation, or talking about politics, or talking about things that in the past, again, just I didn't feel like used to come up. So I think the conversations are being had more on my side of things.
With that as well, I feel like for me personally, the conversation of race and politics didn't begin initially in my life so evident as it is now until maybe around like the 2016 election. And that election, I wasn't even legally able to vote, but I feel like that was the beginning to see the kind of the race relations when it comes to politics and how Black people specifically might view politicians and how we might view how their policies might affect our everyday lives. I feel like it wasn't more of an everyday kind of conversation. It wasn't I guess you could say a quote unquote workplace or school, wherever normal environment. It wasn't a regular type of conversation, maybe until that time. And it started to heat it up more and more over the years ever since then. And then when I was finally able to vote, that's when it was like at an all-time high where, race relations and politics and everything was just high demand, where it was like every single day, every single topic, that's like all everybody focused on. And it was hard to kind of separate friends and separate just their politics, because it became a huge part of their identity, not only how you view them in friendship or how you view them within any type of normal type of relationship. You started to change your opinion on who someone is as a person based on how they felt about their political views. And I felt like that was a scary place that we were in. But I think the conversations are at least being had around race and how it relates to politics in a huge way now.
Yeah. All right. Daniel, Kelsey, anybody?
Yeah, so just to add kind of to what Mr. Nunn was saying, for me as well, it really didn't become apparent and evident for myself until later in life, where it was brought up a lot more conversations were centered around it, a lot more focus, I think as a whole, was just getting the conversation started with people. And I think the biggest, I would say, breakthrough over the years in my experience is that instead of it becoming a competition of a conversation of who is right and who is wrong, it starts to kind of shift. And all of a sudden, people start to understand. And there again, it doesn't matter what the political view is or the race. It comes down to the other person is willing to listen. The other person, as they're speaking, you're taking it in. You're able to really, truly understand the best you can, even though you can't because you're not in those shoes. But at least you're trying to make the effort. And then the same goes for the receiving end, that person is more in tune to listening to you instead of trying to come up with a response. I think that also has created somewhat of a comfort level of not just friends, but also new acquaintances and new networking that you may have with someone. It becomes more comfortable to have those tough conversations outside of that comfort zone. So I think I'm glad personally to see that most people are trying to tune in, or trying to have grown-up conversations about that don't end up in, unfortunately, I've seen where, best friends for life could end their friendship on a disagreement through politics. And that's sad to see that. But at the same time, I hope that it's a lesson learned on both sides.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for all chiming up. Kelsey.
I would say for me, that it all started like when I was of age to like vote and everything, that the conversations, really started, and my interest, peaked a little bit, because I was like, okay, what
Okay, so she froze.
Yeah, we're
This-
still here.
Right. It's happening live. We'll just go with the flow. She's gonna come back in just a sec. We know how these things work in the post-COVID era, the post-Zoom era. But here we are, we're still live with the question. And when she comes back in, we'll definitely let her chime in. Kayla, would you like to touch upon it? What was your first interaction? You said you went to IU and made this even a major. Now I went to IU too, triple ADS major, and so I remember people even telling me, "What are you going to do with that?" And so I'm very proud of what you're doing with it. But what was your your first interaction with it, growing up?
And Kayla, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, my family is a pretty political family. My grandmother passed away a couple years ago, and when she did, we found her arrest record from the civil rights movement in Mississippi. Her and her siblings were born in Canton, which was about 20 minutes away from where Emmett Till was murdered, and very close to the Mississippi burning protest of those 3 civil rights workers from New York. And so my grandmother had gone to that protest and had been arrested with all of her brothers and sisters. And while we didn't find out about it until she died, looking back, it's like, oh, that was always there in her. Like there's always a little bit of dissent underneath the surface of her. And it's really normal for me, like with my parents, to have these conversations pretty liberally. Much like LB was saying, it's very, we have an open space for that kind of dialogue. And growing up multiracial in the 90s here, it was a conversation that we definitely needed to be having at our kitchen table. It was like, okay, how do you guys navigate this in a different way than, my dad or my mother would have had to navigate race in the United States. But IU was really an eye-opener, I think. Going through, I started off just as an art history major, and then the only way I could take courses about African-American artists was to join the Black Studies program. I mean, they were literally kept in the Neil Marshall, and all the other classes are done in the art building. And so that's where my double major in Black Studies came in. And then Black Studies is really sad. It's just a sad topic. So I was like, I got to paint too, or this isn't going to balance out very well. So I was down there. We hosted a symposium called, we got NEH funding to do the Art of Being Black in America, talking about how African Americans have used visual arts, music, hip hop, politics, all of these things to develop their identity in the years after slavery. And pretty much after that, this is all I do now. Right? It's hard to go back from there. The year after that symposium, IU did hire their first Black art history professor. So I felt pretty good.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and let me just say, happy Women's History Month, everyone. We got some history makers on here, and just want to make sure I threw that out. Kelsey, we got you back.
Yes.
All right, go ahead and pick up where you left off.
What part?
Okay, I was wondering. Just again, wanted to kind of frame, your first interactions with race, and how was it really kind of brought to your attention growing up?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So I would just say it's always been discussed in my family and everything, and like we have open conversations, but I would say just with everything going on, just realizing how important it is.
I think that's, honestly, when you think about what we're going through and, as we move into like the next phase of the question, I think the politics, and Eric, you kind of we all kind of touched on just how prevalent it may or may not have been in our family. But as we look at moving forward and, kind of what we're going through right now, do you think that, and I'm going to move into the questions a little bit, do you think that white politicians appoint people of color into certain positions based on their qualifications or based on the politician's personal agenda? Who would like to start with that? Boom.
Don't be shy. Have fun with it. All right, welcome back.
Franklin, you raised your hand.
Yeah.
Sorry, but no, I would say it can kind of be both. I think both can be true in a lot of cases. It's hard for us from a distance to tell up front if a politician is really just using a black face or if they really care about what that person brings to the floor when it comes to their policies or the things that they're trying to implement. I hear some people try to say that they feel like that person could be being used just to be getting like black support or black voters or things like that, which can be true in a lot of cases. But I think the same can be true in the other end, to where somebody might really care or really might need somebody's opinion based on how the delegated race. But I think, in my personal opinion, both can be true. I never see it one way or the other for myself, but that's just me.
All right. Anyone else would like to chime in on that? Daniel, I saw you unmuted yourself, so I'm just gonna take that as a go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So I think, I mean, it's a great question. It hits the nail on the head when we have to really look at, I think, politics as a whole. And I'll be the first person to admit this. I really appreciate Veronica, Ms. Veronica Watkins, and inviting me to this panel. I appreciate all you guys taking your time to discuss this, having these great conversations. So I'm just going to segue into saying I by any means am not a person who deep dives into politics. And it's kind of funny because it actually has to go back to this question where we originally talked about, when did you first hear about politics and race? Was it talked about younger, in life or later? And I'll be completely honest, over the years, I've really given less and less attention to not necessarily politics, but really just the process. I really feel, when we talk about electing, basically people into power, I feel like there's a huge selection process. It's not electing. I mean, you really are getting choices that are not obviously based upon your personal opinion. You kind of get a pick of what is given to you. The process isn't a well thought out and this goes back to your question, where you have that system where it's like, well, if this person, I bring them on board, will they help me accomplish what is on my agenda or what I'm wanting to accomplish? And then if you have that mindset, and to Franklin's point, I don't think it's that way across the board. I think it's a great question. I just don't think it's that simple. But I will say, when it comes to that, I do think there's a lot of that I've seen even in my businesses and dealing with even local politics, that you really have to understand what their agenda is, what they're trying to promise, what you're seeing being represented. And at the end of the day, I've always been taught, your actions speak louder than words. So you can say what you want all day long. You can get on the mic or the biggest platform in the world. But if I see you in live action and you're true to your word and you're focusing on the things that you said you would, I think that's where the trust comes in. So to go back to that original question, I can't speak personally because I don't have that experience professionally, but I will say that I do feel there are a lot of times, and the reason why I mentioned earlier about me backing off of focusing on politics was because I do feel that a lot of the times people are brought in and they're kind of safeguarded to keep that agenda, regardless of it being, right for that community or the state or obviously the country.
All right. All right. Anybody want to touch that question before we? Now, before we even bounce off that question, I kind of just even want to break it down, because again, if we're talking about politics and race, I think it's important for us, even in our viewers, to even just dig into how they have controlled the other in context. Even when we're talking about the construction of race, we're talking about, culture, we're talking about policy, But if even, something about, again, white politicians, and that takes me back to the whole construction of white. Okay, when we're talking about after, around post World War II, and the real estate GI Bill qualifying for, suburban houses, new homes, redlining, and then when you're filling out the application, again, you had these, subgroup. You had the Irish, you had the Italians, you had all the Dutch, all these different branches of, people from Europe. But then when it came down to, putting that name on that application, what are you? White, and that's it. Black for me, but Black was not even on there. And so again, this conversation has come up in a conversation I've had, to where some groups feel like, hey, I've had to sacrifice my culture to a certain extent to adapt in to what was going on. There was a lot more unity before that time. And so it's important to know, and I'm learning myself. So I know everybody's, came into it their own time. African-American studies is one thing. Learning politics and the history of politics in this country and how foul it was. And how, you might think things have been bad now, but when you really get into even just the whole capitalist communist and how that really caused a divide, when you get into people who were in the union and how the union was frowned upon by the government, and these things are just kind of built up over time, and nobody really knows, again, how nothing has gotten started. And I feel like that's just important to just try to hold things to a certain level of integrity, and then just having a level of context. It really, to me, really kind of holds well to if you're not, if you don't know your history, then you're doomed to repeat it. And it's really, again, amazing how many things, if you just search back 120 years ago, 100 years ago, it's amazing just how much correlates to what we have going on now.
So Eric, let me ask you this then, jumping in. So based off of what you just said, do you think things will be different moving forward?
Woo, we're gonna have to do a whole lot of outreach. Let's take this for instance. The whole issue with the critical race theory. You guys familiar with that? I know, again, it's the whole bill being passed. And when I got to looking at it, and I was kind of asking myself, how could this be opposed? Again,
what is critical race theory?
Would anybody else looking like the chime on?
Do you know how to explain it? Kayla said she would.
So critical race theory is kind of it's kind of been politicized right now, right? So all that critical race theory is saying that Black and brown people's history is just as important to the narratives of our country and the world as anyone else's, right? And of course, history is won by the victor, right? If you have had the ability to tell the stories for a very long time, this must feel adding Black and brown people in almost as criminalizing yourself, right? You have to admit that, I'm part of this legacy that kept these stories suppressed. And that's hard to come to terms with, it really is. I imagine that it must be kind of gut-wrenching to confront, but without that confrontation, we don't move forward. You can't, heal from a wound that's still poisoning you. Right. And so until we start having these bigger, critical, like this is a critical race theory discussion, right? This is bringing race into these conversations where it's before, 60 years ago has been left out of. So I'll take that one. Everybody else.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy to chime in. I not necessarily about the critical race theory, but to that point, I think it really does go back to, at least for me, it always goes back to education. And again, going back to school from preschool all the way through college. The fact that we get told pretty much all the same basic things, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, and these are just quick flashovers at that. Where is our form of education? And at a certain point too, and this is something that my mom just kind of personally believed in too, it went beyond the school. It was part of her responsibility as part of being my village, and to put that village around me that we could educate each other. We talked earlier about, naturally when you're not really thinking about politics until it's time to vote. I remember looking at a ballot and being like, okay, I know what the mayor is. I know what the governor is. What the heck are the rest of these positions? Because I have no idea what this is, who this person is, what do they do, how are they eligible, how am I supposed to vote? And she didn't just say, pick the names I'm picking. It was, okay, let's have a conversation. And let me explain to you what this person does on council. And then we even went through the levels of government, from the president all the way down to your local. So I understood going in who had the power to do what, because when you're sometimes younger, you may think, oh, president can just do whatever he wants. No, it doesn't work that way. That's why Congress is so important. But I have run into people my own age who don't even know what Congress is. So when they're out here voting for president, they don't understand that's half the battle. And it's the same thing, I think, again, with on the race side, it's educating yourself. I'm a documentary fiend. I can watch documentaries all day, but even if it's a book or just having this conversation, it's educating ourselves and taking the time to learn more about our history so that we can speak on it, and not necessarily just for ourselves, but for others as well. And I think that has been something that I've seen grow, not just only in myself, but others around me. And I think that's what this really starts to get back to, because as Kayla alluded to, it's been held for so long from us that it becomes to a point where you have people who didn't even know there was a thing called Black Wall Street. There's always these new things coming up that were, oh, this happened. I didn't even know this. And it becomes the thing of, yeah, now you know it, continue to educate yourself on it. And it doesn't always have to be the same thing, but there's so much history out there. And we have to also start challenging our school systems from preschool down to start changing that as well. And if not, start providing it in our own communities and stop waiting for others to do it as well.
I would like to, we have one of our viewers here, Andrea, who's been following along. And if you guys are on the thread, she sent a nice article here. It came right to me, but a lesson on critical race theory. And it's interesting because the first line it says goes back to September 2020, when President Trump issued an executive order excluding from federal contracts any diversity and inclusion training interpreted as containing divisive concepts, race or sex stereotyping, and race or sex scapegoating. And among the content considered divisive is critical race theory. I never got that. Does it come off divisive? I mean, I think Kayla kind of hit it spot on, but am I missing something? Are we, what am I missing? Franklin, what are your thoughts?
And curious to get everyone's thoughts on that too, because I don't know what the premise is behind us trying to. Because I mean, I've heard of critical race theory. I've heard of the ideas. The way it was explained to me was that some people in these classrooms, some of the kids maybe, might feel a certain type of way on how the information from our past, which is real history, is explained to them. And they were basically saying how that might affect how they view themselves and how they might view their peers in that class. But at the same time, I don't think it's our responsibility to have to dumb it down in the truest, what I'm trying to say. Like, it shouldn't be our responsibility to dumb it down. Like, yes, this is a critical part of our history. It's not going to just be whitewashed or wiped over. I don't think that's a good way for us to move forward. But I kind of want to see what everyone else's thoughts are on that policy and on the theory as well. So,
hey, Kelsey, you're at Ball State, correct?
Yes.
All right, you senior, is that right?
I'm a freshman.
Okay, excuse me, my bad. Okay, so coming into Ball State, have you heard this conversation around campus? What's the what's the view on critical race theory? What are you kind of hearing from? Again, I just want you to let you know I'm an old head now. I'm a new OG. I'm almost 40. I got 17 gray hairs. That's just on top of my head. 4 right here. But what is kind of like the vibe on the college campus around this topic?
I'm gonna be honest, I really haven't heard much
Hmm.
discussions about this. Like there's some professors, they will, have open discussions in class, and we have the opportunity to, voice our opinions and such, but many of the students on campus are not aware of these things.
And
I mean, I think that goes back to the education. How many times we've had this conversation? I mean, we've had the conversation with educators on the phone, on the Zoom, on this. At what point can you go back? At what point can you go back and actually change the textbooks and actually change the platforms and change everything that has for so many years been the right way? Now all of a sudden, like when you start thinking about this and you start thinking about critical race theory, what you're really saying is things have to change, but who's willing to put the money behind it to change it? Who's willing to put the money behind it to make sure that everybody is educated enough to do it? And then, like to LB's point, it starts beyond the school system. So it starts like in the neighborhood. So even for me, and thinking about, all right, I'm a business owner as well, an entrepreneur. And is that something that we can educate kids or educate people that want to learn more? Because even as adults, I mean, I asked the question straight up, like, what is critical race theory? We've talked about it, but after this conversation, we've had the conversation before, you kind of forget what it is because you get back to living your life. And until it's ingrained, until you're educated, until it's something that's talked about on a consistent basis, you're really not, I guess, the will and the want to change is not necessarily that obvious, I guess. I don't know.
Well, if we're talking about change, and maybe this is a good time for this question. Here we are, millennials. We're talking about baby boomers who are getting older and fading out. And here we are, we're coming up. And then how do the political views of millennials compare with those of the older generations? And again, that's a question that we have. Take your time with that one. And let's consider who are, again, right now, it just feels like it's, we'll say, Gen X, is that right? Millennials, Gen X, baby boomers. And how are the political views different? What do you guys think?
I don't know that I can only go off my experience with people I've interacted with. I've noticed in older generations, it was very Democratic or Republican, more so. Like you stick to your party. That was, kind of what I kind of heard growing up was, we're Democrats, we're Republicans. If you're a Republican, it was because you fit into this box or this group of way of thinking, and it's similar with the Democrats. In my experience, I've just been seeing more of my own peers, and some a little younger, some a little older. They're more so trying to figure out, I think, going back to the original question of, or what Daniel alluded to, who actually are these politicians? Who are these people? It's outside of Democrat and Republican. Those things are still important, but it's trying to figure out in this system, how do I identify who they are? So I think that's something that I've noticed that is a difference between the political views. And then I think too, older people at times, or older generations, I think we're willing to accept things the way that they were and just chalk it up and say, it is what it is. It's life. This is what it's like. this is your experience. In some ways, I think it's beneficial because they had to survive so much, and they taught and they passed it down on us and they explained it to us from a historical standpoint. But then on the flip side, you have to be willing to also open up your mind to what else can we do to make that change. And again, it's not always necessarily just race, it's just in general, whether we're talking about equal pay, whether we're talking about female empowerment, whether we're talking about things like LGBTQR, like just things that I feel like you couldn't bring up homosexuality to the older generation without it becoming a huge problem. Now, our generation, younger generations, that Gen Z, millennials, we're having these conversations. We're trying to have more and be more open-minded in a way that I don't necessarily think originally, like we said, older generations always were, because they kind of have more of a mindset of this is the way it is and this is what we've been taught. And some of that, there's a whole nother subject, goes back to religion. But at the same time, I think that's where, again, this younger generation is starting to be more open-minded. And obviously social has a lot to do with that too, just, all walks of life being exposed, having different conversations. But my personal opinion, that's really where I see the change happening more so.
Kelsey, Dan, you would like to chime in on that? Anyone?
I have to say, I agree completely with LB. I assume we're still on the saying LB, not Lauren. Okay. But absolutely. And I think just my personal experience, especially with owning businesses in Anderson, that was not where I'm from. I don't have, at the time, didn't have a lot of family there. Obviously didn't have any friends starting those businesses, and trying to really join different committees and hop on boards to try to really bring focus to downtown Anderson and to revamp the commerce down there. I learned a lot, good and bad, throughout with those committees and boards, because to your point, you've got a lot of the older generation. I think that their thinking it's not wrong. It's just different. And it's definitely one that has a stronghold on things culturally that were going on during their time. And I think gradually, as generations come about, obviously years pass, if it really comes down to the person, it comes down to personal choice to be able to listen, to adapt, to understand different points of views. I think the more that you challenge yourself to understand other points of views, to take yourself out of yourself, out of your shell, and to just, even for a small bit, try to understand somebody else, where they're coming from, how the generation was, why they think a certain way, and why you think a certain way. I think that at that point in time, with those committees and boards, it really shed a lot of light to me, that I have a lot of things that I brought from previous generations. Example, obviously my parents, even their grandparents, but then of course, with owning bars, restaurants, cigar lounge, you get obviously a huge range, and you get a chance to have, and there again, obviously they always say don't talk politics, race, or religion in bars, but it's crazy how it always comes up because it's on everyone's mind. And obviously, you get a couple of beverages, you tend to get a little more courage and open up and have those conversations. So just as easy as we say we shouldn't talk about it there, it's actually kind of eye-opening to see a lot of the community, a lot of people, a lot of friends have those conversations, and you get a chance to see why a person feels a certain way, and then it really kind of gives you a chance to have a platform that you never thought you would have, and I think that you understand that even though it's different generation, there are still very similar qualities and cultural things you can agree on, and kind of move that forward.
What as listening to LB and you, Daniel, this thought had came to mind when we get into the conservatives, this, that, and other. It seems like, and just kind of track me where I'm going with this. When this comes down to equality and equity, and again, and who's making decisions in law that have displayed bias, you can't be surprised that you create the problem then that you then try to go against. This week I showed my 7th graders a documentary. So you can put this on your list. Chicago at the Crossroad. Okay. And essentially what it was talking about is how aggressive Chicago was with the public housing that was created at posts like the time when they had slums and things like that. So you're talking about 30,000, you're talking about 28 different houses, public houses, the Robert Taylor homes, you're talking about, what's that, the Bart Green homes, a lot of different projects. And that's what the students was learning was how, this system of creating public housing projects was duplicated all over America. So everywhere you go, if I can go any major city, and the city once upon a time in the 90s, the 90s, how old do I sound with that? And say, where the projects at? You know, I go to Atlanta, where the projects at? I go to North Carolina, where the projects at? And of course, every city had their projects, but in those projects, you had, and it don't just kind of feel like it was interesting that all these projects end up having the same issues with rodents, with maintenance. And then when you go around and you look at cities, and then these projects are now shut down and closed down and boarded up and then torn down, and then brand new homes are built onto those. So again, what I'm getting at is this was a fundamentally flawed decision that was made 60 years. And those apartments have been, again, torn down in Chicago and across the nation. But what did it create was a large population of people who began to think a certain way. So again, when we think about, we can say education, but oftentimes we have to really, again, track back just how it got embedded in there systematically. And we say, some people say, oh, systemically, but now we got to say exactly what it is. So again, public housing was a big deal. My kids, my students was really blown away when they had discovered while watching this documentary that the father in the home, if there was a certain amount of kids, and if the family chose to get on welfare or choose welfare, that the father either had to, and I quote, the father either had to leave or die. All right, for them to actually receive funding. You know, and again, that's just welfare. We will get into the whole, how that then led to Section 8 housing. And then, you know, again, people from these public houses then being, you know, having internal placement throughout the city. And then you have these blending of cultures, and then you start to see this community start to, you know, fall away. We hadn't even got into the drugs and how those got in. We haven't talked about the gangs, but again, it's all these things. It all seemed like it stemmed to something. And again, I know when we talk about, I feel like when we educate, historical context has to be a must. Especially those students really gravitated to that. And I'm very serious and curious about if we structure it in a very, you know, diverse way to where the education is experienced by our youth, because these kids are different. These kids are different, you know, and we shouldn't necessarily demonize this. And I have to tap my own hands, but we got to find a way to really kind of structure it into the main, you know, into rearing our scholars and our students these days. So I'm getting on a little bit of a tangent there, but again, it really just kind of took me to that place. I thought it touched on a lot, explaining this conversation and in terms of the things that we have to undo. Anybody want to come in after that before I just, Kayla, you look like you want to unmute yourself, go for it.
Yeah, and so then that's where like the work that I'm doing with Norwood creates like kind of a different place to educate from, right? We're starting like an oral history program for kids where they'll be paid to interview their grandparents and then research whatever their grandma's talking about. You know, the kids will produce an article and the article will be published. and that costs us almost nothing to do in our own communities. How do we start thinking about projects like this, like with Samson and the walking history tours? Kids on those things love it, being able to see and touch things that are historic and that mattered, and to be able to see yourself physically in those spaces can help us kind of bridge that experiential gap that like the education system's missing right now and has no ability to correct. I mean, let's be honest, the public education system's been defunded to the point that it's almost impossible to be useful anymore. And it's not even really fair to our teachers to ask them to do more if we aren't willing to step in the void and help them, try to figure out where to go next from here. And so, yeah, I would encourage on this topic to just keep teaching. How do we keep doing stuff like this and keep having conversations about what it looks like to educate our children in our own spaces? Because I think it was you, Eric, earlier said, like, we're kind of making a mistake expecting someone to come fill in the gaps for us. Right? We have to mobilize ourselves to do this work. And we have the great fortune of being in the age of the internet where we can tell our own stories for the first time. Like, that's one of the things that our elders didn't get for themselves. They only got the stories they are told. Right? And I was like, he never even cut down a cherry tree. Like, Paul Revere never even went on a midnight ride. These are the stories that were told in school that we find out later on were never true. And so we can't fix that, but we can tell our own stories, and you can do it on a TikTok. It can be completely free for you to record your family's history, and make something, realize that none of us are nowhere. We all came from something.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to tie into that. Even when I say education earlier, and it encompasses all that clearly, but even education and empowerment in a sense. I've always been proud to be Black, to be African American, whatever way you want to label it. But when you start to really learn where you come from, and who you are born from, and what everyone, and whether they're a family member or just someone who looks like you, have endured and what they go through, it's not only becomes something like, I'm Black, it becomes an honor. You wear it as a badge. You take pride in it. And I don't know that that's being taught. Take pride in who you are. And this isn't just us. It's just in general. Take pride in who you are. Take pride in where you come from. Because part of that is that, one of the things, to your point, like you say, you don't want to demonize social media, because in some ways we've seen both sides of it. We see the darkness of what it can bring, and then we see the opportunity that it brings. I mean, there are conversations. We don't have this necessarily conversation without social media. This is not getting put out to the world. This might have just been in a small setting somewhere else, but now anybody can come on this Facebook page and come see this. It's going to be saved, so they can come back a year from now and be enlightened. But it's like we said, it's empowering them and making sure also that they understand. I always feel like that education goes beyond just, like we said, also just the learning in the history, but also a form of empowerment education, especially when you start talking about race.
So along that question then, how do you find yourself? And this is for each of us. I mean, Franklin, I know you have your own show. So how do you find spaces to be able to empower not only yourself, but empower other people to create change?
Things that we can do is take an initiative and taking privilege for us to be born in this age, because it comes with so much with the help of social media and stuff. But along with that comes the endless amount of information that's already out there, like on the internet. And I think it's important for people with platforms to implore, especially young people, to get more involved and to be more intrigued with their history, because maybe their full history isn't going to be completely explained in school. And I don't know necessarily whose fault it is, and I'm not really into pointing fingers, but what I know is that there's an endless amount of information out there. It's just, I don't know if younger kids are curious enough, or if we've put it in a form to where it's like that type of information and that type of history is intriguing to people, because to me it is, but to somebody else who might spend a lot more time on TikTok or on YouTube watching something else that isn't so, as it wouldn't add as much value to them. I don't know how they might appreciate it. I think one of the big things that I'm trying to learn now, especially even with the small platform that I'm trying to build, is how do I provide those type of educational pieces, or not necessarily even educational pieces, but explain free, but providing it in an entertaining way. Because for a lot of people, school and the traditional way isn't an easy way for young kids to pick up on and retain information. Not all kids are wired that way through testing and through those certain type of avenues. So sometimes you have to break it down to them, maybe through a song. Sometimes you got to break it down to them, maybe through a funny video, maybe through a funny sketch. And we see that growing more and more through platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. I mean, all these different type of platforms, but it's on Black creators to continue to tell those stories. It's on Black creators to continue to share those stories, and for young people to be intrigued and really be curious in those stories and go out of their way to seek out their own history, which is something that I'm learning to do and continuing and wanting to do more of. So yeah.
Anybody else?
Mhm.
Kelsey, I know you've been quiet. We've allowed you to be quiet a little bit, but as you've been in college, I mean, I know it's only your freshman year, but even getting invited to conversations like this, what intrigued you to be here today?
Just honestly, the opportunity to learn more, especially about race. I would say politics is not like an area that I'm really, I don't know a lot about it, but I would like to know more to inform myself and others so that I'm aware and clearly understanding things that are going on. And even to go off what Franklin said, just being more intrigued to learn about my culture, my history. And once I get a better understanding and feeling more empowered about myself and my culture, I can go and empower others and help them to, empower themselves.
Love it. When you think about community, I mean, Daniel, both of us have our own businesses per se. You got more than I got, but when you think about your community and even just being able to provide the empowering aspect of it, I mean, you kind of touched a little bit on it, like when you get a couple of drinks, even a cigar, just sitting around, and politics, not necessarily the thing you come in thinking you're going to talk about, but it might come up. Race might come up. And I think my question to you really is, like, when you're put into situations like that, like, how do you go about handling it and making sure that conversations are held respectively and, don't kind of overwhelm anybody, but get to that level of people being able to listen and have the conversation and move forward, hopefully with a better understanding?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway in those instances is really it comes down to either party is really questioning, how are we not on the same wavelength, right? How are we not agreeing? If I feel so strongly about this, I almost feel like you haven't been informed, and how do you not know that what I am saying is correct? I think if the conversation starts out that way, there's already the receiver becomes defensive, right? And with well right to be defensive, because going into it, and I'll just give you some examples. Especially when, like you said, you're more relaxed, you're in a good atmosphere. It's very easy to have, or easier, I should say, to have those conversations when a person's views already, when you already know, let's just say where they've come from, what they've gone through. their environment, let's just say in years past, or their environment now. If you have all this information and you have an understanding, then it's a lot easier to have the conversation. When you don't have that information and when you just assume, I think that's when those conversations get kind of off track, because one person gets defensive, the other person doesn't realize proper etiquette when it comes to even talking through political or race issues. And there again, it's no fault to someone if they're not trying to be. And this is the age-old issue anyways. Just because you weren't trying to be offensive doesn't mean you weren't offensive. Just because you didn't mean to ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing doesn't mean it was indeed incorrect. And so, I think, like I said before, the more understanding of each other, and really having the biggest key word is respect, having the biggest, mutual respect for someone, and opening up as a conversation versus I'm right, you're wrong. I think that's, in almost every instance, comes away with a win, one way or another.
Mhm.
All right. I know we just kind of milling over that for a while, and just because, my mind is, and again, I'm really grateful for this conversation, because when we're talking again politics and race, one of the things I realized I had to do was learn more about politics. How bills are made, and again, like you said, LB, knowing what people's positions are, learning who does what in power and things like that. Because what I'm kind of hearing is politics can influence culture, culture can influence politics, and I mean, we can go back to early years, when we had the celebrities, and what they're doing for for the culture, and what they're doing for the culture of politics. So just kind of using their position and status, and then it just kind of becomes the blend, and that's an interesting point, because when we talk about the whole Black Lives Matter movement, when it became a point where you had players kneeling, you had people wonder, why are you mixing politics with basketball? Just leave politics out of basketball, or leave it out of football, or leave it out of this. And then the response to people saying it is like, wait a minute, how is it, if I'm bothered by what's going on in our culture, what's being permitted by our policies, I'm sorry, I need a mental health day. I just can't get my head around what's going on in society and how many people are really kind of passive about it, and then expect for me to just kind of go on when I'm impacted by this directly. And so I think we just at a point where, me personally, look, I like I said, then I want this has to stay about respect, point blank, period. Everything it's been shown. Now we have so much access to information, and at this point, it just seems like something's not adding up. We've tried this way, we've continued to try this way, and how much longer do we try this way before it's too late? And if we want to keep it 100, I don't know, newsflash, there's a whole war going on in the world right now. And I still think people are kind of passive about it. People weren't passive about it last week. People were passive about it last week. But when them gas prices went up this week, I mean, y'all need to go and quit that over there. What's going on? Let's get, again, we're just in seems like a very numb kind of society sometimes, where this conversation has seemed to kind of fade in society. And is that, people don't protest as much when it gets cold. I'm just gonna be honest, and it seems like there's just not something visibly going on, but it's still something going on. Would you guys agree with that?
100%. I still think there's always plenty. I think, again, it goes back. I think we all alluded to it earlier. It's easy to go back to everyday life because you have everyday life going on. We got families, we got bills, we got responsibilities, and it's easy to, and then you got your own set of issues. Like you said, I need a mental day. I'm late on this. Mom need this. Uncle is sick. Such just passed away. Life gets in the way, but then at the same time, it goes back to, I think as well, understanding that two things. For one, you can't just stop. It's not a period, because it's not, the mission, to your point, is not accomplished. Yeah, we've opened up some minds. Yes, we've had some good conversations, but the work hasn't stopped. There's still plenty more to do, and you have to understand that. So it doesn't mean we all have to do it the same way. That I think that's always a misunderstanding. Like, you don't have to protest to make an impact, but what way are you going to make your impact if it's not out on the streets? Franklin has a podcast. Maybe that's not my way. Maybe I can't get on the mic. Maybe I don't have the discipline, but how do I make sure I'm having that impact in my community? And then I think too, one of the things I think I saw, and I remember having this conversation with my mother with Black Lives Matter, I said, two things, Mom. We witnessed George Floyd on camera, and it happened during a pandemic. If the world had still been going on as normal, would this have had the same impact? And even to this day, I still don't think it would have. We were forced to sit in the house and watch a recording over and over and over and over and over. And I'm sorry, you couldn't not talk about it. It could not come up. And like media does, they hit on something and then they run with it. And a lot of times as people, we tend to do this too. It doesn't hit us until it actually affects us. Think about COVID. Oh, COVID doesn't exist. Oh, shoot, Mom got COVID. Now it's real. Oh, now it's real. It wasn't real when people were already dying in the hospital. Oh, that was a conspiracy theory. But then when it hits you or it makes you feel an emotion, then all of a sudden it's, well, now we have to do something. I know plenty of people who are putting Black Lives Matter up and didn't even really know what it meant to them. I know plenty of people who are putting up sayings or putting up all this information, going back to Franklin's point earlier of all this information. Do you even know what you're putting up? Do you even know what you're supporting? Do you understand what you're fighting for? What's important to you? Or are you just joining in a trend? Are you just trying to be a part of it? So I think all of those layers are encompassing, to your point of that, those are missing pieces. It's not just one thing that we're missing. It's not one thing that if we figure it out, it's all of a sudden gonna be better. It goes back to who you are and what you're trying to do. And then again, we can only really control ourselves. Like I've always said, I can be the genuinest person in the world. I can't make anybody else be genuine. I can't make you accept me. I can't make you open your mind. That's why I hit on what Daniel said so much. It just goes back to opening your mind, coming down and just actually being willing to hear a different point of view. I don't have to agree, but just open up your mind and start the conversation. But back to your point, as far as like what needs to go on, it's an ongoing thing. And until, again, you can affect a household single-handedly, which I don't think will ever happen. I think this is always going to be an ongoing thing because there's, unfortunately, I think always going to be someone who just doesn't agree, who thinks a little bit differently. And it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's different. And if we can't get to that place of openness and equality, then this is what it's going to continue to be.
Right. I want to snap, I appreciate that, LB. I don't know, when you said that, you made me think of Thanos for some reason. Thanos was right. Some have said. But anybody, I know we're winding down. We normally end at about 8:30, but we had a question come in from one of our participants online. Darlene White would like to know, what would you suggest to a person wanting to find out their family history in general and to pass it on to their children? I've been knowing a lot of people doing Ancestry.com, but Kayla, I know you're doing a project with Norwood. Would you go ahead?
Yeah, my first suggestion is to genuinely just sit down and listen to your elders. You're like, hey, grandma, great grandma, what was your grandpa like? Start all the way back. Then they want to talk about this stuff. Most of the time, they've just been waiting for someone to ask. And most people never make the space to ask. Let me show you though, this program, it's through ASALA. ASALA is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. It is one of the oldest Black history organizations in the US. And they came up with this program, and I'm going to drop it in the chat here. And it's all about documenting your family history. So it's using your family reunion as a catalyst to, you know, a lot of Black families still have family reunion. I don't know about y'all, mine's here in July, you know. And so using your family reunion and your family gatherings as kind of a jumping off point to start collecting this history in your own home. We're also, ASALA is going to help come out, and over the summer, we're going to, well, it's probably be the fall, we're going to facilitate programs around exactly this subject. How do we save our own history? You know, if I would have never have sat down with Miss Flanora, who's 92, and done our interview, we would have never known her neighborhood was our Freetown, you know, and I only found out because I asked. You know, she's 92. It wouldn't have been hard to lose everything. You know, there's probably someone you can think of you should go talk to pretty soon. I would start there.
I definitely agree with that, and you know, creating that bridge, you know, to you know, the elders who want to speak. And again, you know, there's that part of me, you know, and we got to work fast with this because, you know, again, COVID didn't help things out. We're still, you know, pressing forward. And again, just, you know, even putting in people's mind that you can ask, that there was something before. I think a lot of people take things for face value. A kid, one of my students got smart with me. I said, "Who created your cell phone?" She said, "God." I said, "Well, you're not right." But I was like, you know, it was just kind of, you know, going into details with it. But again, we definitely had to make that connection. Good point. Anybody else like to add into that point, or you know, contribute to that question?
I personally haven't done it, but I've heard good things about My Heritage DNA. It's more of the cheek swab type thing where you do a cheek swab, but it allows you to discover your ethnic origins a little bit more deeper. Like obviously you can, you know, find out where, you know, where maybe a couple of your ancestors from, but it really breaks down like from a map position as far as kind of like, you know, I had a friend who was really amazed that her DNA matches spanning the world of the United States, Australia, and Asia. She had no idea. So just again, kind of getting a better idea of, you know, where you come from and where that history is. Because as you said, I mean, you know, again, if you go back to, I mean, we always feel like it's just our time, but this world has been around for a very, very long time. So the history of your people could be spread across as well. You know, I agree 100% with Caleb. One of the best things I've ever had to experience was just being at family reunions and just talking to relatives. You know, you don't necessarily love it when you're 10, but you just want to go play and you're like, okay, grandma, all right, this is fun. I gotta go. I don't care. But you know, it's an amazing conversation when you get a chance to really sit down and hear from them and talk to them, and then to be able to go apply that when you go do your continuous research and find out about who you are. So my Heritage DNA, and I'll put the link in here as well, is something I would recommend. That's something even me and my mom have just been discussing, just to learn some more about ourselves and our ethnic origins and where we come from, and you know, incite some conversation.
Well, if we're still talking about equality, and you know, again, this is America, Jack. This is just a, you know, left field question. Do you guys feel like should the Confederate history still exist? Crickets.
Do you mean should it still exist? Do you mean like should we still be teaching it, or what do you? Could you elaborate?
Well, again, we do, you know, so right now, as you might notice, like down south, you're seeing a lot of like statues being torn down, and you know, so again, I don't know the full extent of how it's maybe taken out of books, but you know, I think that's one effort in just kind of erasing it, that it never happened. You know, what are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a very tough conversation. It's not so white and blank as to why we should completely erase it, because there are, I'm not for the symbolism of it, but I'm also not connected to it because I've known people who have branded the flag in some type of way to where they might put it on a hat or put it on something. And this is before I even really understood the true meaning and definition behind it. And they never necessarily treated me any differently until I started to realize, like, okay, that's the real and true history of it. And some people, and one of the things that I noticed from the person that was wearing it, that person didn't necessarily truly understand the history behind that flag and behind that whole movement. To me, I don't understand anybody who would want to support a losing flag anyway, but that's a whole nother conversation. When it comes to completely washing it away from our history books or completely taking down the statues of it, I'm not for propping up like the memorability. I don't know what the word is for it. I'm trying to think of it, but like if you go to Germany or different countries who have experienced certain type of just bad history, you don't see a lot of them flaunting the bad parts of that history. I don't think America should participate in that by continuing to flaunt that history in any type of way. If that means we have to, take down certain statues, if that means we have to do differently, I think it's nuanced. We're in a new age to where with that history, we shouldn't have to, as Black people, we shouldn't have to constantly be reminded that, oh, that's what you were. Oh, that's what we thought of you before. Oh, these are our heroes. But it's like, no, that your heroes to you meant something else compared to what they meant to me. And we shouldn't celebrate them in the same light. Should we all be knowledgeable as to what happened and as to what they stood for? Yes, I don't think we should completely wipe it out and act like it never happened. No, we need to be acknowledge that it did happen. But when it comes to celebrating it, when it comes to branding it, when it comes to creating statues and trying to generate money or revenue from it, that's where you get backlash, and that's where you get people on the other side of the fence saying we don't want to tear down our history. But it's like, if you're trying to celebrate this history as a way of wearing it as a badge of honor, that's where it becomes offensive, and that's where I think that conversation can lead to.
All right, Franklin, anybody else want to hit on that?
I would just say, to add to his point, accuracy. You
Yeah.
know, it really goes back to, like you said, it's part of our history, but half the time they're not even telling the actual story. They're framing it up to fit, again, their ideology. That going back to the systematic system that the part of the system that you've talked about, which is going back decades and decades and decades and decades. And it goes back to how we're being taught, and again, how it's being symbolized to us, in the sense of it, whether we're talking about in books, whether we're even talking about movies. Wasn't one of the biggest probably downfalls of my childhood was finding out the real truth behind Pocahontas growing up and being like, what, excuse me? You just messed up this movie for me. But to that point, knowing the history, knowing how it's being presented out there, because you have some who don't even realize that yet. So I would just add to Franklin's point, which he illustrated beautifully, accuracy. If you're gonna keep it around, make it accurate, make it the truth, because Absolutely. We all know it's not, as you continue to do your research and educate yourself.
Accuracy indeed. And that's really kind of the bottom line of this. And we can go on all night. We probably go on all week by this conversation. We are winding down. And so with that being said, we're going to go around the room and just kind of with our closing thoughts. And if you could maybe do a closing thought and just tying in, how do we connect this conversation to the youth? Just your final thoughts and somewhere combined in that thought. I know LB, Franklin, Kirby. Okay, go ahead, Franklin.
Get it out the way first. Basically, what I took from this conversation was just us continuing to share thoughts on how we view our history, or history as a whole. It's not necessarily just someone's history, but history as a whole, and how we share it with younger generations than ourselves. I think it's important for us to understand that we live in all of this. When it comes to the whole conversation, it's very nuanced. We live in a new day and age where we can use social media and our platforms to push a message. We can also use it to push, false narratives, and that goes into the whole fake news. And I don't want to get into all that, but all I will say is try your best, like I believe LB said, if that's correct. LV said, when it comes to accuracy, it's important for us all to share accurate stories, for us to share accurate accounts of our history, for us to accurately share that with younger generations, for us to continue the story, whether that's through social media, whether that's through your business entails, or whatever you have going on, even with your own children in your own home, because I know we can't all reach out to the whole world, but what we can do is we can affect our community by reaching out to the ones that are close to us, making sure that we are caught up and understand our history. But not only that, but we're being proactive in today's time by going out and voting, going out and making sure that we understand politics and how they directly affect our lives and how they affect the people around us.
Thank you, Franklin, for those last thoughts, and appreciate you for sharing out and being here tonight. Who would like to follow up? Kelsey, being voluntold.
I would just say in general, just being more knowledgeable about everything, politics, race, your culture, empowering yourself. And then also, like Daniel said before, being open to listening to what everyone has to say. You might not necessarily agree with it, but it's okay if, you're looking at a different perspective and you're understanding things. Because someone else's viewpoint may help you to understand something that you may not have considered before. So just being more knowledgeable and open, because at the end of the day, you have to be the change that you want to see.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Kelsey. And we wish you luck. All right. And your next, your future endeavors. I don't want to say next 4 years, you might decide to go to grad school, whatever. You might want to go, you might be a lawyer, you might be I don't know. But I hope you hold on to this conversation and have many, many more with your, your colleagues over at Ball State. And if you ever need a brother to come on up, go ahead and get some of that Ball State money. And I will come down there and talk to the people. Daniel.
Yes, team. So just final thoughts. Once again, I want to thank everyone for having me on. I appreciate us all having this conversation. I truly feel that we still have a lot of work to do. I can't describe how much, even from a country to even a local level, to where I feel that these conversations I'm so glad we're having, but I wish that they would happen on a regular basis with your family, with your friends, with spouses, with couples, because I truly feel that the more engaged each one of us are, and I'm not sure who mentioned this earlier, but once you're passionate about something, it's very easy to talk about it. When you don't have a lot of knowledge on it, when you feel uncomfortable, it's very easy to dismiss it. But when you get some knowledge, you get some history, some accuracy, you tend to get pretty passionate, and that just simply spreads like wildfire in a good way. So I would just encourage everyone who is watching, and the takeaway from all of us is just to get this out there, to continue to talk, continue to conversate, to challenge each other, to challenge yourself, to not only just understand points of views, but really deep dive into the hard conversations, even further than what we did here tonight.
And I thank you, Daniel, for joining us this Friday. Man, do me a favor, like either send an email, I'd like to know a little bit more about your business, the work you do, and see how I can support. You're in Anderson, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well,
Appreciate it.
Again, you be safe. LB.
Yeah, I think everybody pretty much hit the nail on the head, but I'll kind of leave it with this. One of my favorite abbreviated quotes, it's not his actual quote, is be the change that you want to see in the world. You know, and it's quoted as a Gandhi quote now, and I'm happy to put his actual real quote because that is an abbreviation of the quote. But if you read the real actual quote of what he says, and I think it stands out to what we talked about today, encompasses everything that everybody has said. And the quote really helps us, or I think helped me, to pay attention to my inner self and the work that as a person I need to do before I can attempt to change the world. And that goes back to everything that we said here. It starts with you. It starts with you. The inner work is where it starts, where you examine yourself, where your honesty, your vulnerability, your selfishness, your depravity, your insecurity. And as you start to examine those things, I think you can also help others. So I'm just a huge believer in be the change you want to see in the world. I think we all are, based on this conversation, and we all find our different ways and avenues to do it. So continue to educate yourself, but also continue to learn who you are and learn, you know, what matters to you. And then, like we said, use that passion to continue to educate, bring accuracy, and help provide for the next generation. Because eventually, at some point, we're all gone, and I want to leave this world better than I left it. I firmly believe we're here to love, learn, and teach. That's what we're here to do. We're here to love ourselves. We're here to love the others. We're here to learn as much as we can, and we're here to teach to many people as we can before we leave. And then, to Kayla's point earlier, leave some artifacts behind, leave some details behind, leave things behind, and make sure it's in the right hands as well. So then that way, again, it's there for reference later on for many, many generations to come, and hopefully your family will take care of it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of time, again,
You gotta let Kayla finish.
we're gonna let
Yeah, you gotta let Kayla say
Like,
some
oh
more.
no.
All right, yeah, I want you to break down your.
All right, yeah. I mean, I think LB pretty much covered it, right? How do in order to do any good for anyone else, you got to do it for you too, right? My favorite book that I've been reading right now is actually by Mari Evans. It's called Clarity as Concept, and it's all about the Black experience in Indianapolis and how to define yourself within the parameters that are kind of built for you, and how to expand yourself outside of those limitations. And it's really nice hearing someone speak in a voice that could be mine, you know, and feeling seen in that way. So in addition to finding yourself, find your squad, right? Find your community, lean into the people who are going to help you do this work, because this work is not easy. I mean, it can be downright painful some days. And if you don't have the people that you need around you, then you're not going to last for long. So, you know, if you think you're part of my tribe, reach out, we can chat, we can keep working together. And I think that most of the people here would be in the same boat, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Keep up with the work that you're doing. Thank you guys all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tamika, for being a wonderful co-host and keeping this conversation going. We've been keeping this conversation going for 23 episodes. And next month is our 24th episode. 24, a very special number on levels. So definitely you want to be here for our 24th episode in April. And we talk about people doing, I got to give a shout out to my group, one of my groups, BMG, the Black Men's Group, April 2nd. We're having a men's tour, taking young men and teach them how to tie ties, table etiquette, posture, just things that will help them out, tools that will help them out. Thank you guys so much. And
Oh, wait, one last thing. Kayla's artwork will be
Yes.
featured at Tease Me. So make sure you guys come out and check it out. It should be switching everything out on Monday, I believe, Monday, right? So it'll be up at Tease Me, 22nd Street location. Make sure you come check it out.
because we got 2 locations now. Everybody, thank you
All
guys.
right. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining us on your Friday night.
God bless.
God bless you.